back when I was coming through, it was bang, you got told what to do, what time you arrive, and we still do a bit, what time to arrive, what you're doing, and that's it. Where I've been noted to have players run their own sessions. I sit back and just watch players, and it's a rabble sometimes, but they do get sick of your voice, and I think it's really important that, again, your generation started with a voice, and they want to be heard and shared and sort of brought along with on the journey, and not have this sort of authoritarian approach in your coaching or leading.
You're listening to the One-on-One Football Podcast, the number one podcast for Aussie Rules training, coaching, and development tips. Welcome back to the One-on-One Football Podcast. Harry Symington here, co-host of the show. We've got another great episode coming up for you today, but in a slightly different format to usual. Every now and then, Rainsy and I are going to jump on without a guest and chat together about a topic that we ourselves are particularly passionate about. These mini episodes of the podcast are called 20-minute topics, where we try and squeeze as much as we can into 20 minutes, the equivalent to a quarter of football. So Rainsy is the expert on today's 20-minute topic episode. I won't go into too much detail on his background now, although I'd highly recommend that you go back and listen to the very first episode 1 of this podcast, where we dive a little deeper into Rainsy's career, both as a player and a coach. But if you haven't listened to that episode yet, Rainsy's the head coach of the Gold Coast Suns Academy, something that we refer to throughout the episode simply as the Academy. So the topic for today's 20-minute topic episode is coaching Generation Z, a topic that Rainsy knows very well, having presented it at the Elite World Sports Summit in South Africa a few years back. Some of the topics that we cover today are the strengths and weaknesses of Generation Z, the effectiveness of the spray, giving feedback and the importance of following up on that feedback, how to deal with public interest and media coverage for draft hopefuls, getting to know your players, are they intrinsically or extrinsically motivated, mental health in young footballers, a concept called the 5-screen culture, how to communicate with Gen Z athletes both at training and away from the footy club, making sure that this generation is heard, and a really interesting one, vertical versus horizontal relationships at the footy club between the athlete and the coach. So we'll get stuck straight into the episode after this quick message from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by One-on-One Football's online training programs. Choose from 3 or 6 weeks of AFL-specific training helping you take your game to the next level. Sign up for free at oneononefootball.com.au.
Rainsy, good to be back on the show, mate. Let's jump straight into it. Today's 20-minute topic is coaching Gen Z, something that you have a lot of experience with and you're obviously quite passionate about. Could you just tell us first off, who is Generation Z?
Thanks, Harry. Generation Z is anyone born in the 90s, mid-90s to mid-2000s. So I reckon you tick the box there, mate, being a Gen Z. They're globally connected, politically engaged, believe it or not, and fiercely independent, yet they understand the importance of team connection. As you know, which you're really good at, I think it's one of your strengths, technologically innate. So it's obviously sort of embedded in you very early days and your generation. And a little stat, up to 56% of the days are spent online. So obviously always surrounded by the technological side of our world or our living. So that obviously comes with a lot of challenges, which we'll probably chat to today, but also a lot of strengths too. A lot of awesome things that this generation brings to the table in terms of obviously in football and team sport, and then also to the challenges and knowing this. You can face with challenges at times, but giving coaches the ability to be able to deal with and learning more about this generation. So looking forward to getting stuck into this topic today, mate.
Yeah, for sure. And just to expand a little bit on the football side of things with the Gen Z athletes, obviously coaching styles and methods have developed a lot, over the past couple of decades to accommodate, I guess the different personalities of Generation Z athletes. What are some of the biggest changes that you've noticed through the course of your career, and why can't you coach today's athletes like you might have been able to coach previous generations of athletes?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I was actually probably the back end of the old school of sort of coaching. When I started my career, there was some pretty brutal feedback in team meetings. You used to get, sort of singled out if you did something wrong, or not necessarily something wrong, but areas to improve. You'd probably get singled out a lot more. We used to get that with video vision after, obviously, a game. You did something poor or whatever, the coach would put that up on the screen, and wouldn't think they'd do that too much these days. Maybe they do it in a more constructive way. So definitely have seen changes in that. Probably more, again, the old spray. I think we talk about the old school sort of coaches spray at times, and you might be able to sort of elaborate on this a bit more, but I think you can still use that. But I think back in the old day, or old, I shouldn't say old days, it's making me feel a bit old, but back in the old school sort of approach, I think you could probably do that more often where, again, probably ask you the question, you probably get used to someone keeps spraying someone and they use that tone of voice a lot, it loses its effect. So this generation of Gen Z, you can still use it. You just got to use it in a different manner, and you probably got to earn the respect and trust. And you probably got more of a voice these days, where back then it probably more was a sort of an authoritarian type of approach with coaching. And not saying that's all. It's probably more of a broader term and probably more categorising that sort of era. But I definitely noticed a difference. And then when I sort of was finishing up my career, so it was early days in my career, I noticed a lot, and I was sort of coached that way. And I didn't mind it. I sort of responded pretty well to that sort of old school coach's spray and some pretty harsh feedback. But 12, 13 years later, when I was actually at the Gold Coast Suns, ending my days in the sort of the NEFL reserves and helping a lot of doing on-field coaching and helping a lot of Gen Zs and playing with, because I'm a millennial, so a bit of a one generation sort of gap there or difference. But I noticed, a really distinct difference in dealing with these sort of players and types of personalities and what came with that. So I definitely saw a shift and change, and they were more sort of, I think, more responsive to building that trust and connection straight away. And then once you've got that, you can pretty much sort of give that feedback or constructive feedback along the way. So they're the sort of clear differences. I did notice a fairly distinct change over my careers of playing and now coaching. Obviously I'm dealing with it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned that the sprays might not be used as much these days, so it probably has more of an effect when you do use it. And like as a coach, have you ever been about to give a spray and then thought, oh, hang on, this particular athlete, I know with their personality and they're probably not going to respond well to it, and you've sort of held yourself back and communicated in a different way? Definitely.
And again, probably a question for you too, which I'll ask shortly, but I have noticed it's a big thing for a coach to really, if you've got a list, and I remember I did this when I got the role at the academy when I first started. I actually try to sit down with every single player to actually understand them and how they tick, because what you might respond to and be motivated by is totally different to someone else, and that's probably happened throughout all generations. But what I think the difference is, and going back to sort of the previous question, is that other generations probably used to be all under the one umbrella, where these days, and treated like that, where these days I think it's totally different. Knowing the individual is more individualised, individually specific in terms of the way you give your feedback, you motivate, you support, all these type of things. So definitely that was a big thing for me to sit down and actually try and understand and learn how different people respond, because they do. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you sort of agree with that sort of notion of getting to understand the individual, and how did you respond to sort of, with feedback? Do you like it brutal feedback and honest feedback and told the truth, or I suppose most footballers do, but in what sort of way?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. I think I always liked feedback that was either like detailed, informative, or like obviously constructive, but wasn't just you're doing this wrong. It was, I'd always be looking for, okay, I understand that I need to improve in this area, but then what's the action plan? So if a coach, I think you're really good at that as well, was identifying something in your game review or your report, whatever it is. But then as soon as you have analysed it, then say, all right, well, these are the actions, these are the habits that we're going to put into plan to actually improve it. I think as a coach, that's the missing link, I guess. Footballers can, say, I need to kick better, I need to mark better, I need to be more disciplined on field. But I think if you can, sort of redirect the focus, not to what they're doing wrong, but to how they can improve, you're probably going to get a better response. Well, for me anyway, but I think, I remember actually we were speaking to Sally Riley on the podcast, and we asked her what the difference between coaching males and females was like, and whether she thought that the girls should be coached any differently. I think, and you mentioned it then as well, was every athlete's different, and if you get to know the athlete, then you can coach them in a way that they'll respond to. It's not that one technique or one method's going to work for everyone. Is that sort of along the lines of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so, and that's pretty much back what I was saying before, that umbrella approach in terms of the previous generations. Again, me being millennial, I think the previous one before was Gen X, which is probably sort of more the older teammates that I had back in the day, sort of born in the 70s and with that sort of old school sort of approach, which again, strengths and not weaknesses, but sort of more pros and cons, I should say, for dealing with that and the way coaches do that. But the big one's the follow-up too, because if you're given some feedback, I think that's probably the difference these days is the follow-up. And I know that, again, you probably appreciate that if you're going to give some feedback, or you sort of maybe even single out at times if you've done something in the heat of the moment, the heat of the battle. It does happen in football and sport, but it's that follow-up, and that's what I probably really try to pride myself on, that you need to be sort of followed up, and that's sort of the best way to sort of deal with things.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then just to change tack a little bit, so obviously the higher up you get in the development pathway as a junior footballer, the more, I guess, attention you're going to get from recruiters, and with that attention is going to come more pressure. And I guess over the past few years, the public interest in the AFL draft has really grown, and it's continuing to grow. What are some of the? Obviously, you deal with a lot of draft hopefuls and young athletes in the academy. What are some of the pressures that a draft hopeful has to deal with today that they perhaps didn't have to deal with maybe 20 years ago when there was no media and less public interest in the draft?
Yeah, great question. I think actually I asked my dad about when he was growing up, obviously a long time ago now, but when he was growing up, he said he used to, because AFL or VFL football back then wasn't as publicised. I mean, it was a massive game and that, but it wasn't in our faces like it is today. So I asked him the question, I said, did you think you could sort of play AFL football? And he said it was always a dream, and he was obviously pretty good at it and went on to play AFL, but he said it was a dream. They obviously just used to go to school and try to get the best marks they could, and then have that as their plan A, and then they made football great. And then it sort of progressed through the generation. So again, me being a millennial, probably was more on more TV, then the introduction of the internet. We used to obviously be immersed with all the headlines or stories and things like that, and up to date with. So then it was in your face a bit more, expectations of draft, what you're sort of saying there coming through. I remember when I was coming through, there was they'd write reports on you and it get published and things like that throughout the internet and on TV and things like that. And then it's just ramped up since then. So now jumping onto the generations ahead it's 24/7, as I said before. They spend a lot of time on their devices. So it's on Instagram, it's on your phone. You've got access to pretty much everything and anything. So if you're getting an article written about you coming through the draft or the talent pathways or whatever it is, you're going to be spoken about, and there's huge pressure with that. I think the number one draft pick of last year and this year at the Western Bulldogs, he's under sort of enormous pressure at the moment when that sort of much anticipated debut, and whenever he does do that, I think no doubt he will. But just the expectation of that and the media and hype around, I think it's no doubt been a massive thing for this generation to be able to deal with. So coping mechanisms behind that are huge.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned just then the access to devices and articles on Instagram or whatnot being right in the face of the athletes. if you're, what do you think it's a good or a bad thing to read an article on yourself if you're about to come through the draft and you open up and you see a picture of yourself and you're not sure if it's a good or a bad article? Do you think it's worth not reading it at all, or do you think sort of accepting the media is okay? What are your sort of experiences there?
Probably more that individual approach and in terms of what you respond really well to. I know I used to read a bit of I used to read, it was the Herald Sun back when I was playing at Richmond. I used to get the Herald Sun after you played and you'd look at your stats and reports and if you got the best players and all that sort of stuff, and that was sort of done. You'd move on, but now it's on your phone, it's everywhere, and I didn't have that, but in particular early days in my career, but now I think it's probably a good time to probably switch off, whether it's, read an article here and there. I assume they probably don't read the newspaper anymore, so whether it be, I think it's good to read and immerse yourself in your environment, know what is going on in your industry and how you're going. And if you're going to read some good press about you, well, you got to read the bad press too. And that's just part of the game. And then I'll probably try and just find a balance to be able to switch off. And I know a lot of players do. I was speaking to a particular player at the Gold Coast Suns the other day, and he's off Instagram at the moment. So there's different approaches that probably players do these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some of the key things that you do as a coach and a mentor to, I guess, bring out the best in the Gen Z athletes that you coach today? Is there anything in particular that you focus on?
Well, probably back to your point about knowing the individual. I sat down, I think it was similar to when you were coming through, and was sort of anecdotal, or it wasn't a scientific study, I wouldn't say, but it was a sort of try to tick the squad list off on who was intrinsic and extrinsic types of motivators. So being able to be motivated, are they intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated? And it was sort of around 50-50. Yeah, you probably didn't know I was doing it. I forget actually when it was, and I try and do it still, and just trying to work out how they're going to respond. So when I know someone's, like, I'd probably say you're fairly intrinsically motivated, but I don't think you're set in one direction. You can obviously flip and change a bit, but overall, and I knew when coaching you were just really motivated, in yourself. I didn't really have to throw things at you and things like that to try and get you up. But I do have a few players that I've coached, and they're the opposite. That you dangle a carrot in front of them and sort of say, well, if you want to be the best kick in our team, I challenge you to kick, 30 kicks on your left foot tonight or opposite foot and see how you go. And if you do that, then you go in the next category and you're going to be looked at, or whatever it is, just to sort of motivate different individuals. So again, more of an individual sort of approach. And now back to knowing sort of, your squad is really important. I reckon I couldn't recommend that, sort of more to coaches out there, community coaches or coaches, dealing with this generation today.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you have an athlete that you've identified is extrinsically motivated, do you try and help them develop into someone who becomes intrinsically motivated, or do you just try and make sure that you give them the support they need to motivate them? Yeah, extrinsically.
Work with them extrinsically, I think, and try not change too much. Yep. We're put on this earth, and I suppose blessed in certain ways that we are, and I think that you got to work with that and try not change too much in that individual's approach. So that's probably the way I'll go about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be back in a second, just after a quick message from our sponsor.
If you play Aussie Rules, One-on-One Football has an online training program for you. Choose from our strength program, skills program, running program, or the newest edition, Mindful Movement. The best part, you can access it anytime, anywhere, from your smartphone. Sign up today at oneonfonefootball.com.au and get the first day for free.
So, Rainsy, mental health issues are something that unfortunately we're starting to see in young athletes more and more, and at younger and younger ages. Competition anxiety, pressure from school and parents are amongst the most common. How do you ensure that the club environment is a really safe space for athletes to, I guess, let go of any external pressures that they might have during the day at school or at home? And and yeah, really just play footy and have a bit of a sanctuary at the club.
Yeah, it's really important, mate. I think I often think about this and think, well, was mental health a thing that has just come up recently? No, of course it's not. I think it's been there for years. And again, getting back to that older generation, even me on the back end of that sort of generation where it was sort of not, it was sort of a sign of weakness to come out and show that you're vulnerable and you're struggling mentally. And now I think it's great. I think there's so many things out there now we can support ourselves with, and there's coping mechanisms around that. But I also think it's the amount of time that we compare ourselves to others, and talking about social media before and constantly on our phones, and we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, and that's what I think is the huge thing with mental health these days. And again, I can't comment for everyone. There's obviously different levels of anxiety and depression and things like that. So that's obviously a really, it's a medical condition and a condition that people are trying to, work their way through. And I can't comment for those people, but I do notice a lot of kids out there these days that do compare themselves a lot, and then obviously that affects their mental side of things. So yeah, creating a sanctuary and environment of training to be able to, probably even put down your phone. I think I sort of fluctuate with my coaching and what I do sometimes with some of the rules and things we put in place, but I have not been known to sort of put the phones away at the door. So put your phone in the box and leave your phones there, and trying to engage with your teammates and talk, because when you're out in the field, you don't have your phone. So your ability to be able to talk and open up and things like that, I think is really important. And this generation really does struggle with that sort of conversation and always being on their phone, or even standing and waiting for a doctor's appointment or a coffee or whatever. You'll see people go to their phone. So challenge people to try and actually put that away and actually just have a conversation like we would back in the day, because there's one thing that there's been a lot of things that changed in football, but one of the things that hasn't changed is their ability to be out there and use their voice and be able to talk and communicate and build levels of trust and relationship. So yeah, back to the mental side of things, mate, I think it's really important in this generation that we try and create those environments and try and just get rid of the devices for a bit. I think that'll make a huge difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that was something I really found was, like, you look through your day from when you wake up to go to bed, and it's quite rare that you've got an hour and a half, 2 hours without looking at your phone. Don't know if I'm speaking just for myself there, but it's always in your pocket or you're checking something. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to remember that, for coaches especially, that footy can be a release for some people. And I actually know I think I started to miss that a little bit when I stopped playing footy. I didn't have that 2 hour block where I could just switch off. And it's interesting, you sort of find different things, whether it's going for a walk, and actually consciously leaving your phone at home. At the moment, something like that, take the dog for a walk and actually deliberately leave my phone at home gives me a little window where I get that back. I think that's gold. It's it's sort of something that goes under the radar a bit, I guess.
Well, it's just those little things you sort of take for granted a bit, don't you? And I think those things now, the simple things are the best things, and I think they always will be in life, which is really important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And mate, I know you're a big advocate for footballers taking control of their own careers, and sort of doing the hours themselves, whether it's calling a coach, texting a coach, responding to emails, signing up for their own email address. I remember when we were in the academy, I think by the time we were 12 or 13, we were encouraged to do all the correspondence ourselves. Obviously, some parents were still doing it to different age, up to different age levels, but I'd be interested to get your point of view on that. Like, what age should a footballer start to do all that communication themselves, and why? What's the benefit to their development as a person?
Well, we're just taking your own career into your hands, and at the end of the day, if you want to be there and you want to be an adult one day, which is only a couple of years away for some teenagers, you've got to take your own career and take it with two hands, and it's yours, and drive that yourself instead of your parents. Because sometimes, as we hate to admit, there's a lot of parents out there that probably think it's their career instead of theirs, and that's not having a go at anyone. That's not they're not probably consciously doing that, but they're probably doing it in a way because they love their kids and they're trying to protect them. But at the end of the day, I think that's really important for this generation to be able take some ownership and drive those standards. And on that too, it's probably worth noting around the ways that Gen Z communicate differently to sort of my generation, millennials, or generations before that. Now, Generation Z are a 5-screen culture. So that's probably, if we can, off the top of my head, TV, desktop, what else is there? Mobile, tablet, and probably missing one other. But about 5 screens they probably use in any given day, where my generation is probably more, obviously now changed, but back in the day, 2 screens. You probably used to have a desktop computer and a TV and a desktop computer is probably the most sort of technology you probably use in a day. And the best results I've had, so you talk about emails and phone calls and things like that. No, this generation, it will be quicker to get back to you via app-based communication, so like WhatsApp group. So for an example, I send a text message out to some of my players, and probably have to you before, but if I send it via WhatsApp, I'll get a quicker response via WhatsApp than a text message. Incredible. So it's worth managers, coaches out there knowing these type of things and how they react, because when I first started sort of dealing with this generation, I was sort of sending the old text or even phone calls, and I used to think it was a bit rude not getting back to me. And then I started trialing for things and going, bang, set up WhatsApp groups, Facebook Messenger, bang, straight away. It's just the way they communicate. Yeah. So my generation, again, probably more text and email. Again, I'm probably a bit of the death of the phone calls. Again, it does happen, but death of the phone calls probably stopped around my generation in terms of ranking systems or priority of where it started. So back previous generations, I know I communicate to friends of mine in their 40s or 50s, and they'd much prefer a phone call, where I probably prefer a text. And then your generation's probably more, you can do both or all, but you're probably more suited to that WhatsApp, or even you and I are working in the management of the business now and working via Slack, an app that's got all our worksheets and things like that. I know we get quicker responses via that. So just worth noting, I think, the ways of communication. So a long-winded answer around communication. I think that's really important to know what styles this generation do love.
Absolutely. And so that's communication away from the club. If you're communicating with a group of young footballers, whether it's a match review or something, do you find that, we're speaking about the 5-screen culture, do you find that you get a better learning result or a better response from using technology in a meeting, so showing match footage and drawing and whatnot on the footage than you would walking it through on the field or just explaining it to them? Do you find that they respond better to the use of technology in training?
Absolutely. So walkthroughs, visual learning, screens up on and doing sort of drawings and things like that with a program that we use called Huddle, and being able to do a lot of our meetings via that. So in their own time, everyone's busy these days, flicking meetings via, and it might be a voice recording with the screen, with the video playing, getting some really good results and engagement levels from that. But the big one too, mate, and again, talking around structuring up sort of in training sessions or in and around your meetings, is having the ability to making sure that this generation's heard. I think, again, back when I was coming through, it was bang, you got told what to do, what time you arrive, and we still do a bit, what time to arrive, what you're doing, and that's it. Where I've been noted to have players run their own sessions. I sit back and just watch players, and it's a rabble sometimes, but they do get sick of your voice. And I think it's really important that, again, your generation started with a voice, and they want to be heard and shared and sort of brought along with on the journey, and not have this sort of authoritarian approach in your coaching or leading. So it's sort of leading by the side instead of out in the front. Even meeting, structuring, standing up in front is that power of, sort of, that's the boss, that's the coach, that's the teacher, where take a step back, actually sit with them, and in a circle could be, or sit and watch and get players up and just mix it up and different things that you can use, I think, is really incredible for the buy-in of the group, and I think you'll get huge results. I know I have.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's actually reminded me of a book I've just finished listening to, an audiobook actually. It's called The Courage to Be Disliked. Fantastic book. Anyway, and in one of the chapters it talks about horizontal relationships over vertical relationships. So like you're talking about there, you've got you've got a boss out the front who's obviously commanding a group, and what they say goes. That's I guess an example of a vertical relationship that might have worked more back in the day, where you've got a boss and followers. Whereas and something I found that you were always really good with was treating the footballers as equals, so horizontal relationships. Everyone's on the same plane. Obviously different experience levels, different levels of expertise. But I think to be a modern day coach, you've got to, like you said, be able to listen to the athletes and let them be heard on a relationship that's sort of mutually respecting.
Absolutely, and you can do something once you've got them on side, and with the tools and the mechanisms that I just spoke about, then you can pretty much not do whatever you want, but you've just got this huge amount of respect, and you can actually then mix in with the good old spray. If you need to get up someone, give them a rocket or whatever it is, direct feedback, and they can accept that. I'll tell you what, if you come in day one and you start hammering down those things, you just lose those top this generation of players straight away. So it's really important. It's important for everyone out there to get an understanding of how it all works.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think we've taken a little bit longer than 20 minutes, but that's all right. We'll call it stoppage time and go over to a 30-minute quarter. But I think that's all we've got time for today, Ramsey. I think a great little insight into someone I've always seen as a modern day coach, and obviously you're really passionate about it and always looking for ways that you can help your athletes. And any last comments before we wrap it up?
I think we've pretty much covered it all. It's just, again, probably just reiterating that ability to actually know your players, understand them. How do they get motivated? How do you communicate with them? And then how do you get their buy-in? How do you actually build something? If it's a game plan, if it's a leadership group, if it's your team structure, whatever it is, how do you get them on board to actually have some input? Obviously, you have the overall say as a head coach or a coach, and then release. Let them go out. Let them, as you said, use as a sanctuary. There's so many distractions, so many things going on these days. A good distraction. Actually get out there and actually enjoy your football, and not to be seen it's a chore and a dictatorship where you've got to do something that you don't want to do. So creating that sort of environment, I think, is really important.
Yeah, some awesome themes there. Thanks, Reggie.
Thanks, Harry. Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to the One-on-One Football Podcast. If you got something out of today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to stay updated on special guests, new episodes, and more, please subscribe to the show on your chosen platform. And finally, if you have any questions for Rainsy or myself, or you want to get a particular guest on the show, please reach out. Our email address is podcast@oneonfootball.com.au. Thanks, guys. We'll see you for the next episode.